Celeb Savant is a career retrospective type interview focusing on singers, actors, and industry experts. Join Barrett Edelstein now as he dives into the entertainment world.
Scottish A.C. Scott is a chart-topping broadcaster, Sony Award-winning radio host, best-selling novelist, and familiar face from The One Show. Growing up in Aberdeen, surrounded by her father's instruments, A.C. abandoned early musical ambitions in favour of a high-profile broadcasting career. Fronting live chat shows, interviewing everyone from Brian Ferry to Victoria Beckham, hosting primetime television and anchoring radio across Scotland, a Sony Award, New York Radio Prizes, and a stint as a roving reporter for The One Show followed. Then the diagnosis. In 2012, repeated lung collapses forced AC off the air. Told she would be lucky to live 10 years, she wrote novels instead, including a best-selling trilogy published by Orion, with one book adapted for film by Jason Connery. But it was always about the music. A weekend songwriting retreat on Scotland's west coast unlocked something unstoppable. Hundreds of songs have poured out since. Mentored by industry royalty, including A&R veteran Kate Hyman, AC releases her debut album Out of the Blue in April 2026. Up next on Celeb Savant, we've got AC Scott. Where in the world are you and how are you doing?
Thank you very much for inviting me on the podcast. I am in Edinburgh in Scotland. So slightly different temperature, shall I say, to the zone that I imagine that you're in at the moment.
So let's rewind. We've had multiple sort of iterations and dabbles in the entertainment world. So let's go to the very beginning. At what age, whether as a child or teenager, did you think, okay, I want to go on this path, and how did that journey progress?
Well, as I'm sure you've heard many people saying before, I was dreadful at school. I mean, appalling. So I got booted out of school and I had absolutely no qualifications. So I didn't really know what to do with myself. So the first job I had was in a record shop. I've been kind of brought up amongst musicians and, you know, my parents were big party animals and there was always music in the house. So it was always in my DNA, I suppose. But because I didn't really have a clue what I wanted to do with my life other than being in music, I just followed fate. I didn't have a plan, but that was my first sort of, I suppose, paid job. And since that point forwards, I just was always on the periphery. You know, I've joined a band and I was in a band for a couple of years. And then I ended up back in Aberdeen, which is where I was born and brought up, which is in the northeast of Aberdeen, of Scotland. And I was watching cable TV one day and I thought, gosh, you know, they've got no women on there and they've got no Scottish people. So why don't they kill two birds with one stone and give me a job? So I wrote them a letter and they invited me down to London for an audition. And I got a job basically as a VJ, a video jockey. So that was, you know, my first job in the music industry. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then the company basically went out of business. So I went into the local radio station back in Scotland and said, you know, do you want to give me a job? And I mean, I never stopped talking. You'll detect that fairly quickly. So they said, okay, if you can run the desk, you know, we'll give you an audition and see how you get on. So I've always liked tech, like techie things. So I sat there and I learned the desk and I ended up doing the lunchtime program on a local radio station. And after a year and a half there, I was asked to join another station in Edinburgh. That's where my music profession, I suppose, began. You know, I was on radio for years and I still am. I still do a weekly radio show. So yeah, that was great. And then that kind of branched into TV again, music. I was sent on a tour with Simple Minds to cover their anniversary of the band being together for a period of time. So I went off through Spain for a few extraordinary days. I mean, Simple Minds were so big at that time that Lou Reed was supporting them, which seems like a bizarre thing to say, but I'd like to say I met Lou Reed, but I didn't. You weren't allowed to go near his dressing room. So that was, I was always involved with it one way or another. Yeah, but I mean, the songwriting only kicked off about 2 years ago, because I ended up doing a lot of TV and had a bit of a health issue maybe 10 years ago, and I had to stop broadcasting. So I began to write then, but I wrote books. So I ended up writing novels. I got a 3-book deal from Orion Publishers, and I wrote 3 novels. And one of the first novel was picked up by Jason Connery, Sean Connery's son, as a potential film. And yes, so the first book was picked up as a potential film. And during lockdown, Jason and I worked on Zoom on the screenplay, and I kept hearing bits of music. I've always played the piano, and I kept hearing bits of music when we were discussing scenes. So I would just send him voice memos of the music that I was imagining, for the characters and the scene. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, that's me just playing the piano, And he went, "Right, okay." He said, that's not an experience I've had before, with screenwriters sending the music. So that was an inkling that, my brain maybe worked in a different kind of way, because it was a revelation to me, So I then went off to a songwriting weekend in Scotland and met a couple of very well-known musicians in this part of the world, James Grant, who had a band called Love and Money, and Robert Hodgins, who writes all of Texas's songs and things. And they said, "Yeah, we think you're a songwriter." From that, it gave me a bit of confidence. I still have the imposter syndrome deluxe, but I then joined an online songwriting academy in London, which, is like 20 quid a month. And you could do sessions with mentors. So I looked at the mentors and I picked people that were really experienced, because I'm pretty thick-skinned after all these years in media. And I thought, I don't want somebody going, "Yeah, that's quite good, keep trying." And, but they're basically thinking, block that woman immediately, she's dreadful. So anyway, I picked Andrew Rollins because they said that he really does give you both barrels, he doesn't mess around, and Kate Hyman. I spoke to Andrew and I sent him my first song, which ended up being my first single, which is called Sometimes. And Andrew's an amazing songwriter. He's written 11 songs that are in Nashville, the TV series, and he's won an Emmy, and he really knows his stuff. He was Joe Walsh's guitarist and whatnot. So I was delighted that he liked my song. And the next day, Kate Hyman phoned me and she went, "I'm sick of hearing your name." And I was like, oh my God. So Kate is legendary A&R from New York, and she signed Moby and Beth Orton and Jeff Buckley, and she's like a living legend. You should get her on this podcast. She gives great story. She is unbelievable. So they've been with me since then, and that was just about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, in fact. And they're my team, really. From there, I've got my debut album coming out next month, and it feels like a dream.
You're still on radio. What do you love about being on radio?
I love it because it's an intimate medium, and when you're speaking, you're alone in a room. I always end up doing things on my own, whether it's broadcasting or writing books or songs or whatever. And I love that, sitting in a room and talking to that one person. And initially it was about playing music that maybe now it's hard to do, because a lot of the music is generated by Selector, and it's, you're not allowed to play there's no free play really. But the radio station I'm working for still does free play, which is great. So that was very much a passion of being able to play vinyl to people who, tracks that people might not have heard, or ones that they'd think, God, I haven't heard that in years and years, or I've never heard that in the radio. So that was my starting point in radio, and it's still my favorite medium without any doubt. What about you? Because podcasting is essentially that. How did you get into podcasting?
Thank you for the question. So I started off on a podcast called That 80 Show with 2 colleagues of mine. I did sort of a game with them, and then they were interviewing local South African artists, and I thought, go big or go home. So I started reaching out to overseas artists, and within 2 weeks I booked Air Supply. Now, Dori and Paolo didn't have time to do those interviews or do the edits, so Dori taught me how to edit. And then during that year, I interviewed about 30 artists from the 80s. As much as we love artists from the 80s, they are amazing and fantastic. I wanted to branch out. So then that's how I started Celeb Savant. And that was 4 years ago. Heading back to my thoughts that I wanted to ask you. Back in the day, television, radio was the first port of call for people to hear new music. and to hear what's being released new. And now, there's the Spotify playlist on a Friday and all those type of digital DSPs. Do you think that has taken away, I don't want to say relevance, because radio is still very relevant, but do you think it's taken away some of the spark of coming up next is the new release from Harry Styles, coming up in the next half an hour type thing? Do you think that Spotify and the digitals have taken away some of that energy from radio?
Yeah, I suppose so. I think it's probably a different market in some ways. I mean, I'm a passionate radio listener because, I've always loved doing it. But I also have Spotify, or I have to say it is Spotify, even though I do approve of their business practices in any way. And I listen to that. If I have background, if I have, people around, if I have people in the house or whatever it is, if I'm not playing a record, then I will have Spotify on because it's not, interrupted if you have the ad-free version.
Yeah.
And it's just in the background. And if you're feeling like it's suddenly dancing, you can just say, Spotify, play, whatever it is. And radio, because of the lack of choice in some ways, it's less easy to discover, as you just said, new artists, because they can be very narrow in their market. For instance, in Scotland, I don't know what it's like in South Africa. I'd be interested to hear, because in Scotland, there are two massive companies, Bauer and Global, who basically have sucked up all the local radio stations. So now there are little mushrooms of younger, smaller, more niche radio stations jumping up again so that they have free play, so that they can, hit a market that is interested in hearing new artists. Yes, is the answer to the question. Spotify has definitely homogenized it because you don't know what you're going to be, hand fed something that has come through an algorithm and it doesn't come from the heart. But radio is still healthy, and apart from the massive, great big companies who just pump it out, if you're between 15 and 35 and you're, ABC1 or whatever it is, I can never work out what the demographic means, but, they've got about 11 records on rotation and that can drive you to drink, frankly. But I do believe that, smaller radio stations, college radio stations in America are really thriving again because it's passionate, young music fans that are trying to bring unknown artists and bands to the ear of the keen listeners.
It's interesting in Johannesburg specifically. Well, I mean, if you're in Cape Town or other areas, you can listen to it through the app, but not through the frequency. The biggest growing radio station is called Hot 1027, and their remit is to only play old school and R&B. So it's all those songs from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, all those tracks.
That makes my heart sing. It really does. Well, the station I work for is called Edge. There's Edge 1 and Edge 2, and I work for Edge 2. It's an older demographic, and we can play what we like, which is amazing in this day and age. It's a 3-hour show on a Sunday, and, I just love it. It's just, again, it's going back to what we just discussed. It's just the passionate way of delivering music to people. And then certainly the majority of stuff that we play, I play Scottish artists, unsigned artists, and a lot of old tracks that people haven't heard in the radio for years, because we always get people calling up going, oh my goodness, I can't remember the last time I heard that. To me, that's what radio is all about. That, as you said, that surprise when people go, oh, they turn it up because they haven't heard it.
Your books, are you still planning to write more books, or that's in the past? And what were your books about?
Well, my books are all set in Scotland, and they were set in a restaurant, actually. So they're pretty light and fluffy, good fun. It was a trilogy that I had written, because they're still, they're available on Amazon and whatnot. And I get people saying, well, you're going to write another book in this series. And, sometimes I think yes, and sometimes I think I probably will one day. But at the moment, I'm focusing on the music. But it's in you. I think if you're a writer, you're a writer of songs, a writer of books, a writer of diaries. I wrote a diary since I was about 10. But yeah, I think if you're a writer of all sorts. So, never say never, actually. And to be honest, the journey that I've had over the last couple of years, that might be a book. It's been quite amazing, I have to say. I mean, I can't fly because of my health condition, so I took a ship from England to America because I had to meet Andrew Rollins and I had to meet Kate Hyman. Apparently, just to say thank you. But that was quite a journey, So I drove from East Coast America to the West. It's about 10,000 miles and drove back. And it was just the adventure of a lifetime. It was absolutely wonderful. Went to Nashville. which was mind-blowing. And in fact, driving through America was mind-blowing. It was before it's all gone a little bit difficult in the last year or so. But driving through these places that you'd heard about or seen in films everywhere, Rockaway Beach these are all locations for a reason. They're all not a location, they're songs. And you drive through these places and you think, wow, here I am. And, the location of so many classic songs and weird and wonderful places. I mean, we ended up in a swingers hotel in Des Moines. We ended up in what I called the Psycho Motel in New Mexico. I mean, it was an amazing journey, and I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't been for Andrew and Kate. So yeah, it's just grabbing life, because I nearly didn't have a life, 10 years ago. So it just makes you want to really embrace every day. Yeah.
You referenced earlier that I think it was Andrew who said to you, do you realize that you are a songwriter? And you were surprised. Do you potentially think by writing the journal, writing the books, it gave you the foundation to be a songwriter, and you didn't necessarily had the skill until you actually said, okay, well, I'm going to try do it in this way?
It's interesting because when I'm on radio, you are yourself, but you have to be a cheerful individual. You can't go on saying, oh God, I feel absolutely awful today. I really going to play some, something really, a lot of Leonard Cohen, and I'm going for a lie down. All these other entities were personas in a way. The radio Alison was very up and cheerful all the time. And the writing Alison is as well. It's light fiction. It's supposed to be funny. My original diaries were truthful to me and how I actually am. And I think the songwriting in that way has been quite therapeutic, really, because I write about things that really resonate with, your inner self, if you like. And it's a voice I've probably never listened to until I had my darker days. And when you listen to that voice and you let it out, it's really very revealing, and it's quite scary because none of my friends knew that. Well, they knew I played the piano because we would go into a bar and I would sit down and play the boogie woogie. That was kind of what I did. But, they were all surprised, as I was, when these songs began to emerge, because they're quite revealing and, and really rather therapeutic. All these thoughts that you have, but you don't quite know what to do with when you sit quietly and you don't have a lot of noise and distraction. If you let that voice out, it's quite revealing, and it's been it's been a really interesting experience, because if you're generally perceived as an optimistic, cheerful person, which I am, but the flip side of that is I've had pretty dark days, and I think that's maybe why the songs have resonated, because they're a truth. They're not trying to be a sort of poppy commercial, whatever. They are what they are.
And I think when you spoke about writing and letting this voice out, I think it's important that whatever industry a person is, whether they're an accountant, whether they or whatever, to find a route or tool to allow this, whether it's talking, whether it's therapy, whether it's just writing. But so many people keep it stuffed down and stuffed in because there's a fear of, oh, what will people perceive of me if I actually say this? What will I find out about myself if I let this out? All these different things. So I think this is a message to the listener. If there are lots of voice that you have yet to unpack, maybe start writing songs, start writing poetry, maybe just write and let all of that come out, because it's very healing.
I would 100% agree with that. And it's sometimes, it probably comes a bit with age as well, because you get to a point where you don't really care anymore what people, I think when you're a really young person, you're very aware of what other people think, and you're very personally aware of, how you look and everything. And as you get a little bit older, you realize your priorities change, and you just think, just be you, whatever that is. And you kind of think to like it or lump it, really. I keep saying that I've said that. People are going, what, you're releasing a record for? So, it's because it's in there and it has to come out. And, I hope people like it. Some people will, some people won't. But to me, it's a project which I'm so proud and happy that I've done, For me, it's been a great experience, and that's enough.
So you said the album's coming out shortly. What can you tell us about it? And I know it's all very secretive in your world. You've already mentioned it's the truth. It's what you've written from your story and your mind. What else can you tell about this? And are you planning to release more thereafter?
Well, about the album, it's called Out of the Blue because this whole thing has really come out of the blue. I was chatting to Kate Hyam and she said, what are we going to call the album? And I was like, I don't know. She said, gosh, I knew it's just all come out of the blue. And we both went, oh, well, there's the title. The first song I wrote was Sometimes, as I say, and that was the first single. A lot of it was recorded in London with Kevin Salem, who's an amazing guitar player, producer. A lot of the songs were recorded with Andrew in LA. I was only there for 10 days, so, we did as much as we could. And so I've had these incredible collaborators with me. Kevin's another amazing musician, and quality of musicianship that's on the record, apart from, myself apart, is extraordinary, and I kind of pinch myself to think that these people have, are happy to record with me. That's great. I mean, you'll hear amazing guitar playing, amazing production, musicianship from all sorts of people. A great country singer called Garrison Starr, she did some backing vocals for me, and a guy called Greg Cash did the bass, and so really great musicians. Cody Rand, fantastic drummer, and Andrew and Kevin. They're eye-watering guitarists, really. I can't speak when they play. My jaw just hangs there open. I'm going, good grief. So that's part of it. But yeah, the story, I suppose, is I write about my parents, There's a song called Highlands, which is about going back to the Highlands where I was brought up every year, to see your folks, and you notice they change, they get a little bit older. And, my Mum sadly had memory issues, Alzheimer's. So that's a really hard song to listen to. It's a hard song to write. That's when I realised the resonance between, I suppose, the cliche of saying that songwriting is therapy, because that song really, my mum passed away in lockdown. So it was still pretty raw, or it still is pretty raw, and it all came out in that song. So it's personal stuff like that, but also there's euphoria because I've suddenly ended up in this position, So there's some great uplifting ones. There's one called Party People, which they sort of calling a sort of Leonard Cohen disco number. And that's about finding your tribe of people and just doing what the heck it is you want to do, just go and do it. Because as they say in Scotland, you're a long time dead. So there's some uplifting ones. Again, there's some great rock guitar in there. So it's a hard album to put into a pigeonhole, and that's what people have said. It crosses quite a lot of genres, but that's just how it came out. And I think in that way it is a journey. There's some slow, methodical ones. There's some people go, oh my God, there's some rocking guitar riffs in there. And there's Hitting It Hard, which is about coming from a party family. You always think, right, that's it. I'm going to get my act together. I'm going to clean up my act. I'm going to behave myself. And then you get dragged back into the bad behavior. So yeah, hopefully there'll be something to appeal to anyone that just enjoys, music with a bit of heart.
Are you writing more songs for further releases, or you're just focusing on this?
No, I've already got a second album. We're going through all the songs to try and work out which tracks are going to go on that. It's like some kind of seam has opened up, and I've just got so many songs that are I've written over, 150 songs maybe now. It got to a point where I had to stop and just shut everything down because it was becoming a form of madness. Thank goodness for voice memos. I have no idea how people would have, kept track of their ideas and their hooks if they didn't have something to pick up and record. So yeah, I'm definitely going to continue recording and releasing, and I'm very lucky to be in a really nice music community in Scotland, so there's a lot of great producers and musicians here as well, because as I say, much as I'd love to fly to LA and New York every week, taking a boat or a ship is quite an adventure. So
how long does it take for a boat from there to America?
A week. Yes,
a week.
It's a real voyage of discovery, and you set off from Southampton and you don't see land until you land in New York, and you that's me using it. I haven't been in a plane for years, but sail and past the Statue of Liberty, and I'd never been to New York. So actually, what a way to arrive in America. It was like a film, it was just like a film. And I arrived and I've got two great friends from Scotland that live there. couple of guys, and it was Pride the weekend I arrived. We arrived on the Saturday. So they picked us up off the ship and we just went out and partied in New York. And I thought, wow, if I'd got here in my 20s, I'd never have left.
I'd love your observation of this next topic, being in radio and releasing music at a later stage. I read an article, I think it was about 3-4 years ago, about, I think it was BBC Radio 1 and maybe possibly BBC Radio 2. And they were speaking specifically on females and women, not men. And in the article, it said that if a female artist is over the age of 30, they are no longer relevant and they will no longer play them. And I was shocked. And I remember I was reading Bananarama's autobiography. And in the autobiography, at the age of 23, 24, which was in the 80s, the record label dropped them because they said they were too old. I strongly feel that maybe social media has assisted in sort of breaking these barriers, specifically when Kylie came out with Padam Padam about 2-3 years ago. Again, the radio stations refused to play her because she's 55 and she's too, in inverted commas, old, which drives me crazy. But then social media blew it up and then they were forced to play it because all the kids who they are their target audience, who say are not interested in the older ages, force them to play it because it blew up. What are your thoughts on this whole conversation?
I think that's just typical sort of ageism and sexism wrapped up in a nice little box, which, we've had to deal with for a long, long time. A quote like that is just so destructive. And actually, from a creative business like radio, to put anybody into a box like that is absolutely ludicrous. You get great artists from the age of 12 to the age of 85 or 100 until they take their last breath. So it's a ludicrous thing to say and very inaccurate. And actually, going back to our conversation earlier when we were discussing radio, it's that demographic, isn't it? It's turning it into a mathematical equation rather than a creative universe, which is what we're in. So I would completely ignore anything like that. And I had an interesting chat very recently with a guy he's actually a music lawyer, and he looks after quite a lot of big artists. I was asking him, what is the incentive now for people to make music, young people especially, because they want to go out there and make a lot of money, or they would like to at least. And he said it doesn't matter if anybody makes any money or not. It's a creative itch that has to be scratched. You can't not write music, or you can't not sing songs, or you can't not do radio or podcast, whatever it is that drives you. You'll do it anyway, even if you end up starving to death. I think, you get these characters in the radio world that make these sweeping statements, but generally speaking, they end up eating their hats because you can't tell an audience what it is they're going to enjoy listening to. To me, you give them a broad selection of music to listen to. It doesn't matter how old somebody is, or it doesn't matter what sex they are. It's just about whether they like it or not.
I love this next game. I know if I had to ask you this question tomorrow or the next day or the next day, I know your answer will be different every time because there are millions of them. I'm not saying favorite. I'm saying top of mind. If once we finish this conversation, you want to go to listen to 5 other artists, past or present, who would those artists be?
I absolutely love Leon Russell. I love Steely Dan. I love the Average White Band. I love Ella Fitzgerald. But when you're coming right up to date, I love Noah Kahan. I love Teddy Swims. I love Marianne Faithfull. I love anything that Nile Rodgers touches, I love. I'm a disco queen. I love all that stuff. We've just heard we run a wee festival here where I live, just outside Edinburgh, and Kool and the Gang are coming. So they're high up in my brain just now because I've been listening to them going, I can't wait to listen to them in a tent round the corner.
The podcast is listened to throughout the world. As a final message, what would you like to say?
Well, I would just like to say that, life is a journey, a really exciting journey. And don't ever be pigeonholed by your age or by your sex or by what people expect from you. Just listen to that inner voice and absolutely 100% follow your heart, because you don't know where it'll take you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Celeb Savant. Please follow Barrett on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Celeb Savant. That's CelebSavant.